Hi, I'm Mervyn Smith. I'm really excited to be here today at Engage Live to talk about copyright. We're going to look at copyright from a photographer's point of view rather than the law point of view where none of us really want to go. But let me give you a little bit about my background first. I am currently employed in Belfast Exposed photography as the Community Engagement Manager. I've been there now for 22 years. Part of my role there as Community Engagement Manager sees me to go out into communities and getting them to tell their stories through photography. And as you're aware, copyright within that is very, very important. My other role in Belfast Exposed and how I came there in the first place is as a photographer, documenting the troubles and looking at social and political impact in Northern Ireland to deal with that over the years. Belfast Exposed was founded in 1983. It was a group of amateur photographers who decided to document ordinary life in Belfast. That was what was in behind the troubles that you've seen on your daily news. It became very successful and an exhibition was born out of this, and the exhibition was called Belfast Exposed. From that exhibition, many people said, could we tell our stories? And the stories were then told through photography. Belfast Exposed, the organisation, grew out of that initial exhibition. We are now in Donegal Street in Belfast. We have a contemporary gallery of photography, an archive of images, and a community engagement programme, which are all very successful in their own right and which amalgamate into ourselves being actively engaging all members of the community through our programmes. With this, we have built our archive of images and, very importantly, copyright of those images. The copyright issue that we're going to look at is from a photographer's point of view. We're going to look mainly at how to protect yourself as a photographer and issue contracts as a photographer. So, what is copyright? Copyright is, by definition, under the Copyright Design and Patents Act 1988, that which is recorded by the author. In other words, when you actually take your picture, your thought process goes into taking the picture, you're making a physical recording of something, an event or a subject. You then, having done that, make a copyright of that. You are the author of it. Now, to protect this copyright is very important. As anybody knows, having taken images, putting them out online, putting them out on the internet is a way of actually promoting your business, but can lead itself to your copyright being infringed. I'm going to give a couple of scenarios looking at copyright and the importance of understanding it. We're going to look at it from a photographer's point of view. We're not getting into the legal jargon at all of copyright, but we're looking at a way that you can assist and protect yourself. The first scenario in copyright is setting up a shot. So if you picture that you're setting up a portrait shot, you are actually doing the lighting, you're positioning the model, you're giving direction, and you have someone who presses the shutter of the camera. You own the copyright. The person who pressed the shutter of the camera actually has just pressed the shutter of the camera. They can't claim copyright to that. They are not the author of that piece of work. That's one aspect to be very careful of. Another scenario is that during a wedding, you have commissioned a freelance photographer to come along and assist you as a second shooter. You don't have a contract in place with that photographer, and they take their pictures of the wedding that day. They then give you these pictures, but you then see these pictures appearing somewhere else. And you phone up this freelance photographer and say, why are you using the wedding pictures? And they say, because I have copyright to them. This is true. They are the author of those images. You have no contract in place, therefore you can't claim those images. They aren't licensed to you. So let's have a little look at best ways and best practices to avoid these scenarios. Always bear in mind that as an employee, copyright for this instance will go to your employer. There are instances today where the NUJ have argued against this and been successful in this argument. But we'll take it as read at this moment that if someone is employing you and you are an employee, the copyright belongs with the employer. If you are a freelance photographer or have been commissioned without a contract in place relinquishing copyright, the copyright belongs to you as the photographer to do so with what you wish those images. So it's very important to always realise, protect yourself and protect your images. You also have a responsibility to your client. For example, if you undertake a wedding and you have these wonderful shots at a wedding, the happy couple are very, very excited and you're very excited to promote your business with this wedding. You now put these images online on your website to promote your business. Without agreement from the married couple, which comes under private and domestic copyright, you can't actually do that. Even though you have the copyright of the images, you haven't got any specific means or any specific permissions from the private and domestic contract that you have not in place to state that you can use these images to promote your business. Again, a contract is always very important to do this. When you put your images online, and we'll mention Facebook for this, their terms and conditions clearly state that they can take images and will take copyright of those images. So it's always best to make sure that when you're putting your work online that you protect this. And a very simple way of protecting your images is through watermarking. You can fade the watermark in and it can be almost hidden. This stops online theft of your imagery because there's a very, very gentle watermark through it. And anybody looking at it will see this faint mark and progress onwards. It's very important how you position the mark to make it obviously as difficult to remove as possible. But it's one great way of protecting your imagery online. One of the very simple ways of doing this is actually through Photoshop. There are many other copyright ways of information to do it, and one of the best ways to do it is actually to put your business name across it. You don't ever have to use the copyright symbol or the word copyright on the image. So the best way to look at it is to position the word of your business faintly across an image where you can actually choose where you want it to go and it doesn't have impact on the image. So that is an absolute brilliant way and a very simple way of when you want to promote your work online to make sure that there is no way someone will take this image. They'll see a faint mark, it's no good to them. They don't want it. The way we've positioned it is across 3 or 4 different aspects of the photograph, which makes it quite difficult to remove. It would take quite a bit of time to remove that image. Having put your business name across it, if someone does ever take the image, they will automatically see this, and then they'll wonder who had this image to start with, who is the author of this image, and it'll clearly tell them who the author was. So for example, if someone tries to sell them the image and they see the word Belfast Exposed across it, and the person selling them the image wasn't Belfast Exposed, they now know copyright has been infringed. We need to look also at public domain and public access. Within the public domain, what we generally think of in public domain, and we'll keep it very, very sort of basic for this, is that when copyright has expired. So when does copyright expire? For any photograph taken under UK law, it actually is 70 years after the author has passed. So when you die, your copyright is 70 years after you have died. That's how long it lasts. There are scenarios where it can come down to 25. There are scenarios where your family or yourself can actually give copyright away. But one of the aspects in copyright is a word called license. You can actually license your images to another party to use. And in that agreement, in terms and conditions of that license, it gives them usage. Not for everything they want to do, only what is specific in that license. For example, if you see your image online when you have granted a license to publish in a magazine, then you have been copyright infringed. Your copyright has been infringed by the licensee. You need to actually take that up with them. If you find your copyright has been infringed at any given time, rather than steam off to any solicitor, very simply contact the person who has infringed your copyright and try and resolve the matter. The only thing by going to solicitors is to drag the process out, and it can become costly. Most copyright infringement can be sorted out between the two parties. So that makes it very, very clear in any license agreement you have about the usage of it. One other aspect of licensing agreement, and it is an agreement that I myself have in place with Belfast Exposed, is that I grant Belfast Exposed a sole license to use my imagery. So if you've granted a sole license to use your imagery, you as the author cannot then go to another party and grant them license. The reason for that being is you have chosen an organisation, in my case Belfast Exposed, to represent myself as a photographer. I still work for Belfast Exposed, but after I'm long gone, I would still like Belfast Exposed to represent myself as a photographer in the work I have done. This is something that you may want to think of when granting licenses. This is something you may want to think of with your own images. Do you want somebody to represent you? And this is another aspect of copyright that you should consider in your business. So one of the things that we're looking at is contracts to protect you as a photographer, to make sure that you are protecting your client and the copyright of your image. Always have contracts in place. So with your wedding photographer, with your portrait photographer, have a contract in place that you can use the images that you have taken in a way that befits the manner in which they're taken. That is to say that you're not going to use the wedding images for any other purpose other than to promote your business. As the same with the portrait. You can use the images you've taken, have a contract with your client in that you're going to promote your business with their images. Most people will not have an issue with this. If you're going to go online, again, use the simple little aspect of putting a watermark across them, and this should protect your copyright in terms of that aspect. Many of the online services that you see, we have one of the most popular is Facebook. Within their terms and conditions, they do state they can take copyright of your imagery. You need to be really careful if you're using Facebook to promote your business. That's one aspect that you must look at. And if you use the simple little watermarking method that we used, can protect your images somewhat to that happening. I have an instance where a friend went into a card shop and spotted a picture of his newborn son on a card. The card was for newborn children, and this had been taken from his own Facebook page. So you need to be really careful and understand the terms and conditions of what you're signing up to, Facebook hadn't done anything wrong at all, and most people don't realise that the terms and conditions are clearly stated that they can take imagery. Always be careful of this. You also need to be very careful if your friend has taken a picture and they give the picture to you and you decide that you'll sell the picture on to someone else, you have now infringed copyright. Your friend is the author of the imagery, and they are the person who should and should not be deciding where the image is going to be sold or used for. It isn't you that decides that. You're not the author of the imagery, so be careful there too. So in terms of contracts for your work, where do you get them? There are many websites that have the contracts, but if you go to the National Union of Journalists website, you will find contract templates there. These will make sure you as a photographer are protecting yourself and your client and have been drafted with the NUJ and legal departments that make them a sound, solid contract. One of the best aspects of your contract is to keep out any legal jargon that is hard to understand. This comes really into play if someone actually comes back to you with an issue that they say you didn't tell them about. That could be you're going to promote their image on both online and competition. Many wedding photographers enter wedding competitions and submit them to it. If someone comes back to you with an issue with your contract, it generally means that they have been aggrieved somewhere. So let's look at your contract. Keep it in very plain, simple terms. State what you're going to use the images for. This will have been agreed at the outset on contract signing with your client, and when they come back and say that you have used the image incorrectly, you can point out in your contract that you haven't. If you have used the image incorrectly, then this is a matter you need to sort out with your client. Try, above all, not to go down the legal route of getting solicitors, but you can actually apologise to your client and say, sorry about that, I have used that image incorrectly and I will withdraw that image from that usage. You can then ask your client, if you wish, would you mind if you were to use that image in a certain way? It could be you want to enter the image into a competition and you hadn't got it in your contract and they've seen it in a competition. You could ask your client to sign a license for you to do that. It's very important that everybody is happy with the contract that is drawn. At the moment, UK electronic signatures are law. In the south of Ireland, electronic signatures aren't law. So you need to be really careful when you're signing electronically. There is the old saying of have a paper trail. With today's online service, somebody may say, I didn't get that, that wasn't there, I didn't have that. In essence, it is sometimes always very good to have a sheet of paper originally signed by your client and yourself. That's one of the great aspects. When you meet your client, you can ask them to sign the contract. You can take them through the contract. You can amend each contract that suits your client, but it is always very good to have a hard copy of that signed as an original signature by your client and yourself. Make sure you date it and make sure the contract is very clear and what it lays out you can do. You're meeting your client, so when is the best time to have a contract in place? With your initial discussion from your client, you're going to find out a lot of information of what they want, how they'd like it, and what they'd like for you to do. You yourself can actually state what you would like to do as a photographer. It's very important that your own creativity is within the boundaries and guidelines of what they want from your service. So this is how you express yourself. Where does the contract come into play now? Now you have information from your client, you can go look at your contract to see if that fulfills all your needs and their needs, and if not, tailor that contract to suit. You can then send a copy of that contract to your client and say, as per our discussion on, I have drafted the contract, and upon signing the contract, they then would send you deposit or bring the contract and the deposit to you. And that means everybody is happy at that particular stage of the contract signing. The deposit is now paid and you can move forward with your business transaction. Within your second shooter at your wedding or portrait or any commercial job you're undertaking, you are generally employing this person as a freelance, or you're commissioning them to undertake some work for you. They're not a full employee of your business. Therefore, the authorship of the work that they take is theirs. They own the copyright to that. What you have to be very, very careful of is that you have a contract in place that gives you the rights of those images. That contract will be designed by yourself and should not be any problem in a second shooter signing. Let's look at the fact that you have taken lots of work with previous and you don't have that contract in place. You can retrospectively send that contract out, asking that photographer to give you the copyright of the work as they were freelancing to yourself and you commissioned them to undertake the work. Therefore, you would like the copyright of the work. You're going to get two people here. You're going to get the first person who says, oh yes, that's right, I done that, sign the contract and send it to you. Or you're going to get somebody where it raises a suspicion. And generally the suspicion could be around a financial gain. That's where you have to be very careful in sending retrospective contracts. The last thing you ever need is for your second shooter to perhaps come back to you or contact the people who you'd undertaking the wedding or portrait for to say there is now an issue surrounding that. That's why it's very important from the outset to have your contract in place, sit with your second shooter, make sure they fully understand what is required of them on the day, and make sure they fully understand that the copyright of the images is going to come to you. You can, if you want, be very generous in an aspect and keeping within the law. Instead of taking the copyright off them, ask them to solely license the work to you. And within that, they themselves will gladly do that. It is quite a bit of a minefield when employing a second shooter that most people don't do. They simply ask a friend or another colleague, would you be the second shooter on the day, and not put contracts in place. So as you can see, there are many pitfalls in doing that. It's always best to have a good, solid contract which cements the relationship and makes you move forward as a good business deal with your client, your second shooter, and your own reputation. Let's perhaps look at a contract that you may have with a client. We'll say, for example, a wedding. Photography is art. It is subjective. All art is. So let's have a look at perhaps your client, after taking the wedding pictures, has decided we're not happy with those. Now let's look at what the contract stated. Have you taken the pictures that were asked of you? Have those in your contract? If you've taken the pictures that were asked of you, then it perhaps isn't along that issue. You can say to your client, I have taken every single image that you have asked of me. That's fine. Bear in mind you're a professional photographer, so the images should be of quality. And that is perhaps where the issue is arising. So let's look at the quality of the images. For example, you have taken all the images that have been asked of you, but your clients aren't happy. Suddenly it's pointed out to you that in 4 of the images that there's a fire extinguisher coming out of the groom or bride's head. That could be deemed not a quality image. The next image, say for example, has a little boy in the background who's at the wedding, jumping up and down, and is a distraction. You could have actually asked that little boy to move aside or stop jumping up and down, then take that picture. So when you're challenged as a photographer, always bear in mind that there could be an issue with some of the images you have taken. Take that on board and see if there's anything you can do with those images. For example, the fire extinguisher coming out of the bride's head that you've suddenly been pointed out to you, you could remove through Photoshop. So you could strike a balance with your client that you can some way adjust those images, or if you can't, say, you're absolutely right, those images aren't of my standard and let's renegotiate payment for this. So with your second shooter and your contract, treat each of your clients individually. That is, if you have 50 weddings, then have your contract by your second shooter signed for each wedding. Each contract may slightly change, each venue will change, the wedding will change, what may be asked of you to change, so there's no reason why you shouldn't have a brand new contract in place with your second shooter. What you'll do in that, it will clearly state the day of booking, where it's booked for, who the client is, and who is actually responsible for the day. The second shooter will know that they are then an assistant to you, employed in a freelance capacity, and that the image rights are yours. And that will happen for every single job that you do. The difference between your second shooter, who is a freelance, is that you're commissioning this person. They have full ownership of that work. The difference to an employee, whereby you are actually employing the person on a full-time or part-time basis, there will be a process for that employment to have taken place. You may be paying their tax for them. They are subsequently bound by the rules of the employment contract that you have designed for them and the rules of employment. Again, the NUJ are challenging that contract, but as it stands, we're just looking at today the difference between an employee and a commissioned photographer in terms of the copyright in which the images they take. One of the greatest ways to explain public domain and public access is perhaps through an art gallery and a wall mural. If you walk into an art gallery and take a picture of a piece of work in the gallery and start using that and making prints of it, you are actually infringement of copyright. If you see a piece of art on a wall, you can photograph this piece of art and perhaps make little postcards of it if you wish, because this is in public domain. You should always be wary that the copyright for the original piece of art still belongs with the author, but it is in public domain. Public domain and public access on your website can be infringed. If you have images on your website and images on your Facebook that are taken and published, they have still broken the copyright agreement and law, because they are not public domain, but they are public access. The public has access to it, but not the right to take it on you and use it as they so freely will. They should have contacted you stating, we have seen an image on your website and we would like to use that image. And then a contract of agreement will be termed and that image can then be successfully used. If you find your copyright has been infringed, there are two ways of dealing with it. There is contacting the person or organisation that infringed your copyright, clearly stating when they've infringed it and how they've infringed it, and perhaps send an invoice of what you would have charged for them to use that image. This generally can resolve the issue. If that does not resolve the issue, then you're in this aspect of, do you want to go down the legal recourse for settling this dispute? That itself will be costly and will be time consuming. So it's always best to have an open discussion, either via email, letter or telephone, with the organisation or person who has infringed your copyright in the first place. Perhaps just stating, by the way, you published an image of mine in your newspaper, and give the date and what the image was. I'm just looking to see where to send the invoice. You can simply do it like that, and they'll say, send the invoice to our accounts department, and in terms of monetary values, it can be resolved. The other aspect of that is the pricing. If you look at the NUJ website, it will clearly tell you price rates for publications. Now, these can be a little bit higher than you would hope to get, but these will be a very good guideline. If you want to pursue the infringement of copyright, and you can state, by the way, you've infringed my copyright and there is a charge for you doing that, you can put that in as well. But the initial aspect of is to make the publication aware they have done this. Then a follow-up with your invoice. The other aspect of infringement of copyright or publication of an image is what is known as the moral right. The moral right is that every author of an image deserves the right to be credited with the image. Now, this can't always happen in newspapers due to space, due to the fact that they're running a schedule, due to the fact that sometimes they crop an image, but there is the moral right of that. The moral right clearly states that you should be credited at all times with your image, particularly when given to publications. The credit may not be directly below the image, but within publications can appear in an appendix at the back or front of the book, clearly stating the page, the image, and who the author was. With newspapers, it is sometimes a little bit more difficult, but you should always try and clearly get your moral right adhered to. So I hope that enlightened you in some way. Again, I didn't want to go down a full law lecture way of copyright. It was purely in a way to protect yourself as a photographer and to keep your reputation and your business clients and your personal clients and your private clients happy. That means your wedding, portrait and commercial businesses. So if you have any further queries or need to get in contact with me, you can get in contact with me at Mervyn at Belfast Exposed, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.